The desert holds its breath at night. There's something about the silence of Arizona after sundown that feels heavier than silence elsewhere. The stars seem brighter, the horizon wider, the air thinner and more alive. Coyotes call in the distance. The wind brushes against dry stone, and the city of Phoenix lies cradled in shadows, its lights twinkling softly, as if trying to imitate the heavens above. On most nights, that silence is ordinary, but sometimes silence carries more. Sometimes silence waits. And on the night of March 13th, 1997, that silence gave way to a mystery that would echo across decades. The Phoenix Lights, a night when thousands of people, young and old, police officers and doctors, families on porches, and strangers on highways, all saw the same impossible thing: a massive, V-shaped formation of lights moving slowly, silently, majestically across the Arizona sky. It was not a story whispered by a few. It was a chorus. Entire neighborhoods looked up, their voices falling into hushed disbelief. People pulled off the road, headlights dimming, gazes fixed upward. It was as if time itself slowed, while the desert sky unveiled something that did not belong, and yet belonged too much to deny. Close your eyes, breathe slowly. Imagine yourself there that night, the warm air brushing your skin, the wide desert sky stretching infinitely above. And then, from the horizon, lights. 5, 6, 7, perhaps more. In perfect alignment. A shape too vast to comprehend, gliding silently, blotting out the stars as it moved. Some said it was larger than a football field. Others swore it was larger than entire cities. A craft so vast that silence itself seemed to bend around it. And yet, the silence held. No engines, no roar, no sound at all. Only the steady glow of lights, moving with impossible precision. This was no trick of the eye. No fleeting glimpse. It lasted long enough for families to call neighbors outside, for police officers to radio dispatch, for strangers to stand shoulder to shoulder in awe. The Phoenix Lights were not a story told after the fact. They were lived, together, in real time. Before that night, before the desert sky revealed its secret, the people of Arizona had lived ordinary lives. Children went to school. Couples ate dinner. Neighbors watered lawns. The desert was still, the stars indifferent. And then the silence shifted. Breathe again. Inhale, exhale. Feel your heartbeat slow, as though you too are standing in that desert night. The first reports came just after 8 p.m. Calls flooded in. Lights moving south from Nevada into Arizona, crossing Prescott, heading toward Phoenix. Witnesses described them as orbs, as flares, as craft. But more than one voice described something greater. A solid structure behind the lights. Not dots moving separately, but lights fixed upon the same massive body. Some said they could see its shape against the stars. Triangular, V-shaped, like a dark wing, stretching across the heavens. And all of them spoke of silence. Silence so heavy that it seemed louder than sound. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves. Adults whispered, their voices trembling with awe. Some felt fear. Others felt wonder. But all felt certainty. This was no ordinary aircraft. This was no illusion. The Phoenix Lights became more than an event. They became a moment of unity. Strangers stood together, watching the same impossible thing, feeling the same shiver of recognition. something beyond them, something vast. Imagine the highway that night, cars slowing, hazard lights blinking, people stepping out onto asphalt, heads tilted back, mouths open in disbelief. Imagine entire families on rooftops, fingers pointing skyward. Imagine police officers, trained to be calm. Radios crackling with voices that trembled anyway. The desert sky held them all. Quiet, infinite, alive. The lights passed slowly, deliberately, as though revealing themselves on purpose. They did not dart. They did not flicker. They moved with grace, with intention, with presence. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. But they did not leave silence behind. They left questions. What had thousands of people seen that night? Was it flares, as officials later claimed? Was it planes in formation, as skeptics insisted? Or was it something else entirely? Something vast, intelligent, and deliberately hidden in plain sight. The Phoenix Lights remain one of the most witnessed, most undeniable, and most ignored events in UFO history. But tonight, we are not here to argue. We are not here to prove. We are here to remember. We are here to let the story unfold slowly, softly, like the craft itself drifting across the desert. So close your eyes again. Breathe with the desert. Let your body sink into the rhythm of the night. Because this is not just a story about lights. It is a story about presence. It is a story about silence. It is a story about one night in Arizona, when the sky opened and thousands of people looked up together and saw. And as you drift deeper into this tale, remember, the truth does not always shout. Sometimes it moves silently, gracefully, leaving only questions in its wake. And sometimes, those questions are enough. The night of March 13th, 1997, did not begin as extraordinary. In homes across Arizona, families settled into routines. Children finished homework. Parents cooked dinner. Couples sat before televisions, flipping channels between the news and sitcom reruns. The desert sky was clear, stars scattered sharp and endless. And then, reports began to ripple through the state. At first, it was small. A call here, a sighting there. Lights moving strangely. Too bright to be satellites, too low to be stars. Air traffic controllers fielded questions but had no answers. Local police radios began to carry voices that sounded less certain than usual. It began north, near Henderson, Nevada. A man reported 5 lights in a V-shape moving silently overhead. His voice was calm but insistent. He knew planes, he knew stars, and this was neither. From Henderson, the lights moved southeast, across the darkened desert, toward Arizona. Next came Prescott. Multiple families stepped outside and saw the formation. Massive, silent, moving slowly. Some described a structure connecting the lights, blacker than the night sky, blocking stars as it passed. They stood in their yards, neighbors calling to neighbors, pointing upward in disbelief. Imagine standing there, the crisp desert air brushing your face, the ground cool beneath your feet. Then, above, a shape so large it swallows the sky. No sound, no explanation, just presence. From Prescott, the lights moved south, toward Phoenix. By then, word had begun to spread. Calls flooded into police stations. Families urged relatives to come outside. Drivers pulled over on highways, forming small crowds along desert roads. Everyone pointing upward, everyone united by awe. And what they saw was not fleeting. The craft, or the lights, moved slowly, deliberately. long enough for people to call others, to gather together, to stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers beneath something that felt larger than all of them combined. The V shape stretched wider than football fields, perhaps wider than cities. Some witnesses swore it was a single craft. Others said it was multiple lights in perfect formation. But nearly all agreed on the same thing. There was silence. Silence so complete it felt intentional. No engines, no rumble, no familiar sounds of jets or helicopters. Only the desert air and the faint rustle of leaves. One witness, a mother in Phoenix, described her children tugging at her hands, whispering, "Mom, it's bigger than our house, bigger than our street." She held them close, her own voice caught between fear and wonder. Another, a retired police officer, reported the lights through trembling breath, his training undone by the enormity of what he saw. And still, the lights kept moving, steady, patient, undeniable. Breathe slowly now. Inhale, exhale. Feel yourself standing in that night. Your eyes tilted upward, your chest tight with wonder. The craft glided over Phoenix. Witnesses described seeing its shape blot out stars. For some, it was triangular. For others, boomerang-shaped. Some swore they could see windows or outlines of structure. All agreed it was immense. Cars stopped on highways. Entire neighborhoods fell into silence. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. But no storm came. It was as if the desert itself was holding its breath. From Phoenix, the lights continued south, passing over Tucson, disappearing slowly into the horizon. For hours, reports poured in. From Nevada to Arizona to the edge of Mexico, thousands described the same thing. Massive, silent lights in formation, moving across the sky. And still, there was no explanation. The next morning, local newspapers carried small mentions. Radio shows buzzed with callers. But national media was quiet. Officials offered few words. Silence filled the gaps where answers should have been. But those who saw it did not forget. The Phoenix Lights became their story. A story they carried into every conversation, every memory of that night. A story too large to dismiss, too undeniable to ignore. And yet, it was ignored, dismissed as flares, written off as misidentified planes, reduced to rumor, even though thousands had witnessed it together. Close your eyes. Imagine being one of those thousands, standing with your family, your neighbors, your children, watching the sky open, knowing, absolutely knowing, that what you see is real, and then being told the next day that it was not. That is the heart of the Phoenix Lights, not just the craft, not just the lights, but the silence that followed. The silence of officials, the silence of media, the silence of denial. And yet, silence does not erase truth. The people of Arizona remember, the desert remembers, the stars remember, and tonight you remember too. Breathe again, inhale, exhale. Let the desert night wrap around you, calm and infinite. Let the lights drift slowly across your imagination. Let the silence carry you deeper into rest. For the Phoenix Lights are not gone. They remain in memory, in whispers, in every glance upward into the night sky. And as you drift toward sleep, you carry that memory too. The night had passed, but the memory remained. March 14th, 1997 dawned like any other day in Arizona. The desert stretched wide under the morning sun. The mountains stood steady and indifferent. The cities stirred awake. Yet within thousands of homes, the air was different. Families sat at breakfast tables, recounting the night before. Strangers greeted each other in grocery stores with hesitant questions. Did you see it too? The Phoenix Lights had become a shared secret, one too large to ignore, but too strange to fully believe. One witness, a father in Prescott, told local radio that he stood outside with his teenage son. The lights had passed directly above them, so close and so vast that he felt his heart tighten. He described seeing not only the glowing orbs, but a structure connecting them, a body darker than the sky, a wing stretching across the heavens. His son backed him up, their voices weaving together in quiet awe. Another witness, a nurse in Phoenix, described looking up from her yard and feeling an overwhelming calm. She said it was as if the lights were not only above her, but around her, as if silence itself had descended to hold the moment in place. She did not feel fear, only wonder. And yet others admitted fear. One police dispatcher remembered the calls flooding in, voices panicked, voices insistent, voices trembling. Families claimed the object was larger than their neighborhoods, larger than anything they had ever seen. Drivers reported pulling to the side of highways, headlights off, staring upward in disbelief. There were too many witnesses to dismiss. Yet, as the day moved on, the official words began to arrive. Some said the lights were nothing more than flares dropped during a military exercise. Others claimed they were airplanes flying in formation, their lights exaggerated by desert atmosphere. Simple explanations, neat and tidy. But the people who saw them knew better. How could flares move silently, in formation, across hundreds of miles? How could airplanes blot out stars, appearing as a single vast craft? How could so many thousands agree on the same impossible sight? The explanations did not erase the memory. They only deepened the mystery. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Imagine yourself as one of those witnesses, your own eyes locked on the sky, your own heart stilled by the vastness above. You know what you saw. You tell others, and yet the news says otherwise. Officials shrug. The silence thickens. This was not the first time the world had chosen silence over truth, but it was one of the largest. Thousands across Arizona carried the same vision that night. A sky filled with lights, a structure too vast to comprehend, a silence too deliberate to mistake. And yet the cover of ordinary explanations fell quickly, but the voices of the witnesses did not fade. One retired Air Force officer living in Phoenix described the craft as otherworldly. He knew planes, he knew exercises, and what he saw was neither. He spoke calmly, without exaggeration, and his voice carried weight. Another, a mother of 3, said she watched the craft pass directly overhead. Her children clung to her arms, whispering in awe. She swore she saw panels, a body, something real and solid above them. Years later, her children still told the same story. And perhaps the most famous was the governor of Arizona himself. At first, he mocked the event. He held a press conference, smiling, bringing out a staff member in an alien costume, making light of what the people had seen. Laughter filled the room, and the story seemed to fade into dismissal. But years later, that same governor confessed, quietly, solemnly. He admitted he had seen the lights himself. He admitted it was no joke. He admitted that silence had been easier than truth. Breathe deeply now. Inhale. Exhale. The Phoenix Lights were not simply a sighting. They were a test of memory against silence, of truth against dismissal, of wonder against ridicule. And though officials offered explanations, though media moved on, the people of Arizona never forgot. Their voices lingered in radio call-ins, in community meetings, in late-night conversations whispered under starlit skies. Parents told their children. Witnesses repeated their accounts. Neighbors nodded in recognition. The night of March 13th did not vanish. It only grew quieter. But silence does not erase truth. And as you rest tonight, imagine yourself among them, one of the thousands who looked up, who saw, who knew. Feel the desert night around you, the silence above you, the lights drifting slowly across the horizon. You are not alone. They were not alone. And the memory of that night still moves, still glows, still waits in the desert air. By the morning after the Phoenix Lights, the story should have filled front pages. It was not a single witness in a lonely field, not a blurry photograph tucked into a drawer. It was thousands of people, from children to police officers, from families on porches to doctors and pilots. Entire neighborhoods had seen the same thing. And yet, as the hours passed, silence began to settle. Local radio buzzed with callers. Talk shows brimmed with stories, but national coverage was cautious, hesitant, almost dismissive. When headlines did appear, they leaned toward explanation, toward doubt, toward dismissal. The media carried a strange weight that week, as though acknowledging too much would unravel something they were not ready to face. So instead of wonder, there was ridicule. Newspapers framed the lights as curious but ordinary. Some said they were military flares. Others called them planes. Even when witnesses described vast structures blotting out stars, reporters steered the words toward confusion, exaggeration, hysteria. But the witnesses knew what they had seen. A teacher in Phoenix told her class the next day that she had watched the lights move silently over her street. Her students nodded, whispering about what their parents had seen too. The children drew pictures, V-shaped craft spanning entire skies. They knew it was not planes. They knew it was not flares. And yet, television news laughed, anchors smiled, guests joked. The story was pushed toward the margins, turned into entertainment instead of truth. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Imagine standing before a camera, describing what you saw, only to hear the word flares repeated back to you. Imagine trying to explain the silence, the vastness, the way stars vanished behind a solid shape, only to be told you were mistaken. It was a dismissal that stung. A police officer later said, "It's one thing for them to say they don't know what it was. It's another thing to tell me what I didn't see." That was the heart of the Phoenix Lights controversy. Not only the sighting itself, but the silence that followed. The official explanations came quickly. The military claimed it was flares dropped during an exercise over the Barry Goldwater Range. But witnesses knew the difference. Flares drift downward, flickering, fading. These lights moved steadily, deliberately, across hundreds of miles. Others said it was planes flying in formation. But pilots themselves disputed that. The silence alone, no engines, no rumble, was proof enough. No plane that large could glide without sound. And still, the explanations continued. But beneath them, the voices of thousands carried on. One family recorded video of the lights, faint but steady points glowing in the night sky. Skeptics seized on the video as proof of flares. But those who stood beneath the craft knew video could not capture what they had felt. The awe, the silence, the certainty. Years later, witnesses still spoke with trembling voices. Their memories were not softened by time, they were sharpened. One woman recalled standing in her driveway, her neighbors beside her, as the lights passed overhead. She described the way her breath caught, the way silence deepened. the way she felt as though she were being watched in return. Another, a pilot, said he had seen countless planes in his life. But that night, what he saw was not a plane. His voice was steady, calm, certain. And then there was the governor. At first he mocked it. He stood before cameras, smiling, introducing a staffer in an alien costume, turning the moment into theater. Laughter rippled through the room. The Phoenix Lights were reduced to punchline. But years later, that same governor admitted what so many had already said. He had seen it too. He had seen the vast craft, the silent lights, the presence that defied explanation. And his laughter had not been disbelief. It had been fear. Fear of what it would mean to admit the truth. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let the thought settle. The people had been right all along. The silence had not been absence. It had been avoidance. The Phoenix Lights remain one of the most documented UFO sightings in history. Not because of video, not because of headlines, but because of memory, because of voices, because of the unity of thousands standing beneath the same silent sky. The media may have dismissed it. Officials may have laughed. But the desert remembers. The desert remembers the lights gliding overhead. The desert remembers the silence that pressed against skin. The desert remembers the awe that united strangers for one night. And tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, you remember too. Because truth, no matter how deeply ignored, does not vanish. It waits. It lingers. It shines like lights above a silent desert. Time passed, but the memory of March 13th, 1997 refused to fade. For most events, days blur into weeks, weeks blur into years, and eventually what seemed urgent is reduced to trivia. But the Phoenix Lights did not soften with time. Instead, it sharpened. The silence of the desert that night became a silence in conversation, a silence in newspapers, a silence in the halls of government. What beneath that silence, people remembered. Witnesses still told their stories, at first shyly, then firmly, then with unshakable certainty. A mother in Tempe described calling her parents outside when she saw the lights. 3 generations stood together in the driveway, mouths open, silence holding them in awe. Years later, when asked again, she said, "I know what I saw. No one will ever convince me otherwise." A pilot living in Phoenix recalled looking upward and feeling his training betray him. He knew flight. He knew the sounds, the speeds, the patterns of jets and helicopters. But what he saw was not flight as he had ever understood it. It was presence, a vastness that dwarfed his years of expertise. The Phoenix Lights became more than a sighting. They became a quiet defiance, a refusal to let memory be erased. And still, explanations lingered. Some clung to the flare theory, but witnesses rejected it. They remembered the movement, steady, silent, deliberate. Flares flicker and fall. These did not. Others suggested planes, but the silence was undeniable. Engines roar, even at distance. This did not. No explanation satisfied. And so the Phoenix Lights endured, not as a solved puzzle, but as an open wound, a mystery that refused closure. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let your mind drift back to that night. The way the stars vanished behind a vast shape. The way silence felt alive. For many, the Phoenix Lights became personal. A story passed down in families. A memory shared at gatherings. A moment when the sky itself had broken into the ordinary and whispered something extraordinary. Some drew sketches. Others wrote journal entries. Parents recorded their children's descriptions. They refused to let it vanish. And yet, the official silence continued. Years later, the governor who once mocked it admitted he had been afraid. Afraid of panic, afraid of ridicule, afraid of truth. His confession reignited voices that had been quieted, as though validating what thousands already knew. The Phoenix Lights were real. The question was never whether they happened. The question was only, what were they? Theories blossomed. Some whispered secret military projects, vast crafts tested silently over the desert. Others leaned toward extraterrestrial presence, visitors revealing themselves in ways undeniable but unacknowledged. Still others suggested something stranger, that the lights were not ships at all, but something beyond technology, something symbolic, something meant to remind us of mystery. Whatever the answer, the effect was the same. Thousands had looked up, thousands had seen, thousands had carried that night with them ever since. Close your eyes now. Imagine yourself as one of them, standing in your yard, the desert still around you, the lights passing overhead, silent and steady. Years later, you still remember. No ridicule, no dismissal, no silence could erase it. This is the power of the Phoenix Lights, not in proof, not in photographs, but in memory. In the quiet conviction of thousands who know what they saw. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Let that conviction settle in your chest. The Phoenix Lights remind us of something deeper, that truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it glides above us, larger than imagination, waiting to be remembered. And perhaps that is their purpose, not to reveal answers, but to awaken wonder. For wonder is stronger than silence. And as you drift deeper into rest, you carry that wonder with you. The lights passed, the years passed, but the memory remains. And tonight, as you close your eyes beneath the same stars, the desert whispers again. The Phoenix Lights were real, and they are not forgotten. Years turned into decades, but the Phoenix Lights refused to fade. Most UFO stories slip quickly into obscurity. They flicker for a season, then vanish into dusty archives and whispered retellings. But not this one. The Phoenix Lights lingered. Not because of photographs, though a few exist. Not because of government reports, though some were filed. The Phoenix Lights lived on because of the voices of thousands. People who looked up that night and never forgot. People who carried their memories into every conversation, every interview, every documentary. People who, despite ridicule, stood firm and repeated again and again, "We know what we saw." Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself imagine those voices, steady and insistent, a chorus echoing through time. The Phoenix Lights became a cultural phenomenon. Television specials revisited it. Documentaries aired across late-night channels. Authors compiled accounts, piecing together the night like fragments of a puzzle too vast to solve. Each piece mattered. Each voice mattered. A retired police officer described the lights as so massive they covered entire neighborhoods. A doctor compared the silence to something unnatural, as though sound itself had been stripped away. Parents remembered the awe in their children's eyes. Children, now grown, still recalled clinging to their parents, whispering that the sky had opened. The Phoenix Lights became not only an event, but a legacy. And yet, official voices remained quiet. The military stood by its explanation of flares. The government shrugged. Newspapers occasionally revisited the story, but always with a cautious tilt toward doubt. Still, the witnesses did not waver. They spoke at conferences, they gave interviews, they filled community halls with their recollections. And the more they spoke, the clearer the pattern became. This was not hysteria. This was not illusion. This was unity. Unity of experience, unity of memory, unity of conviction. Imagine it now. Dozens of voices across Arizona, strangers to each other, yet telling the same story with the same rhythm. The lights, the silence, the vastness. Not planes, not flares, not tricks of the mind, something more. And because of this unity, the Phoenix Lights grew larger than a single night. They became a symbol of mystery ignored, a symbol of truth dismissed, a symbol of how silence does not erase, but instead deepens the weight of memory. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. The Phoenix Lights also changed the way many thought of the sky. For some, it was the first time they truly looked upward and wondered. For others, it was the moment they realized the universe may not be silent after all. It awakened something, a curiosity that did not sleep, a longing that did not quiet, a belief that we are not alone. And perhaps that is why the Phoenix Lights endure. Not because they were solved, not because they were explained, but because they were unforgettable. The desert remembers, the witnesses remember, and tonight you remember too. Close your eyes, feel yourself beneath that Arizona sky once more. The lights pass overhead, silent and deliberate. The world tells you it was nothing, but your heart knows better. The Phoenix Lights live on, not in answers, but in questions. And questions are powerful. Questions keep us awake. Questions open our eyes. Questions turn silence into wonder. And as you drift deeper into rest, the questions of that night become lullabies. What flew above Arizona? What passed silently across 1,000 witnesses? What truth was too vast to name? You may never know, but you remember. And sometimes memory is enough. The Phoenix Lights were not just a story about the sky. They were a story about people, about families who stood together in awe, about children who clutched their parents' hands and whispered that the sky had opened, about neighbors who stepped out of their houses and for one night shared silence instead of small talk. The Phoenix Lights did not happen to governments or officials. They happened to ordinary lives, and that is why they endure. Close your eyes, breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale. Let yourself imagine being one of them. Picture a father in Prescott, stepping into his yard after dinner. His children tug at his sleeves, pointing upward. Above them, a V-shaped formation of lights drifts silently across the night. He feels his breath catch, his heart tighten, his mind scramble for explanation. Yet no explanation comes. Years later, those children, now grown, still remember the night their father stood with them in wonder. They remember his silence, his awe, his voice trembling as he said, "This is not a plane. This is something else." Another memory. A mother in Phoenix tucking her children into bed, hears neighbors shouting outside. She hurries to the porch, the children following. Together they see it. Vast, silent, steady. The children whisper, "It's bigger than our house, bigger than our street." The mother holds them close, not in fear, but in recognition. Recognition that the night had shifted into something extraordinary. And decades later, those children still recall that night as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The Phoenix Lights became part of their childhood, part of their family's story. And then, there was the retired police officer. He had spent his life distinguishing truth from rumor, fact from fear. That night, he called in the sighting with trembling voice, his training unable to erase the certainty of his eyes. He later said, "It's one thing for them to say they don't know what it was. It's another thing to tell me what I didn't see." These stories matter because they are personal. They belong not to headlines, but to hearts. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Think of the thousands who stood beneath that sky, each with their own life, their own worries, their own ordinary evenings. And then, for one night, all drawn together by lights too vast to ignore. A grandmother in Tucson, sitting on her porch swing. A teenager driving home from a late shift. A couple celebrating their anniversary. A doctor, a teacher, a mechanic, a child. All strangers to each other, yet bound forever by one night of impossible silence. The Phoenix Lights turned individuals into a community of witnesses. And perhaps that is why the story has never faded. Because it was not just one voice. It was thousands. Thousands who remembered together. And together, their memories became unshakable. Close your eyes deeper. Imagine yourself standing among them. You hear gasps from neighbors, whispers from children, radios crackling with disbelief. You feel your own breath slow, your own skin prickle. You know you will never forget. That is how memory survives, not in the archives of officials, not in the headlines of newspapers, but in the hearts of people who refuse to let go. The Phoenix Lights became a family story, a neighborhood story, a community story. And tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, it becomes your story too. Because stories this vast do not belong to the past. They belong to all who listen, all who remember, all who wonder. And you wonder still. What passed above Arizona that night? What connected strangers in silence? What made thousands look upward and know they were not alone? You may not have the answers, but you have the memory. And memory is enough. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Let the memory settle into your chest like starlight. Let it calm you, soothe you, carry you deeper into rest. Because the Phoenix Lights are not gone. They live wherever wonder survives. And tonight, wonder lives in you. The Phoenix Lights were not only an event, they became a mirror. A mirror reflecting how the world responds when truth presses against silence, when mystery refuses to vanish, when thousands speak with one voice, yet are told they were mistaken. In the months after March 13th, 1997, the story could have ended quickly. Officials could have issued explanations, and people could have accepted them. The media could have reduced it to a footnote, a curiosity, a forgotten fragment. But the Phoenix Lights would not fade, because people would not let it. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let your mind drift to living rooms across Arizona, to families gathered around televisions, waiting for answers. They listened to laughter, to ridicule, to the word flares repeated like a chant. And yet, they shook their heads. They whispered to each other, "No, that is not what we saw. It was not flares. It was not planes. It was something else." And so, the Phoenix Lights entered culture. Documentaries began to appear. Late-night radio shows welcomed callers who had been there that night. Authors compiled witness accounts into books. Researchers traveled to Arizona, gathering testimony. Each story added weight, added conviction, added life. The Phoenix Lights were no longer just a night in 1997. They were a phenomenon. A doctor from Scottsdale gave interviews for years after. She described standing in her driveway, staring upward as the V-shaped craft passed. She spoke calmly, without fear, without exaggeration. Her conviction was simple, steady. It was real. A pilot interviewed in documentaries described how the craft's silence shook him more than its size. "Engines always make noise," he said. "This didn't. That's what I'll never forget." And then there were the children. Their drawings preserved in books and archives. Simple lines, V-shapes in the sky, stars blotted out by darkness. Decades later, those children, now adults, still told the same story. Their voices matured, but their memories unchanged. The Phoenix Lights were not erased. They were retold. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Each retelling mattered. Each witness who refused silence added to the weight of memory. And so, the Phoenix Lights grew into one of the most documented UFO events in history. Not because of radar, not because of photographs, but because of people, because of voices, because of memory that refused to bend. Yet with each retelling, skeptics circled. They pointed to flares dropped at 10 p.m., recorded on video. They called it coincidence. They leaned on ridicule, suggesting mass hysteria, tricks of light. But those who stood beneath the 8 p.m. event, the massive V-shaped craft gliding silently across the state, knew better. They knew what they saw, and no ridicule would erase it. The Phoenix Lights became a battle between voices and silence, between those who remembered and those who denied, between witnesses who carried awe in their hearts and officials who carried fear of answers. And in that battle, memory won, because the Phoenix Lights did not vanish. They entered culture. They inspired documentaries, books, conferences, even annual remembrance events in Arizona. Every year, people gather to remember that night. They tell their stories again. They hold signs. They look upward. They remind the world, this happened. We were there. We know what we saw. Close your eyes. Imagine standing in such a gathering, decades later. Families beside you. Children now grown. Strangers nodding in recognition. The desert night above you, as silent and vast as ever. The memory alive, the unity intact. The Phoenix Lights endure because they are more than lights. They are legacy, and legacy is stronger than silence. Breathe deeply. Inhale. Exhale. Let that legacy settle within you, calm and certain. For what thousands saw that night was not erased. It became part of history, whether written in books or whispered in dreams. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, you carry that history too. The Phoenix Lights are not gone. They are here. They are alive in memory, in culture, in every question asked beneath the stars. And the questions themselves are enough to keep wonder alive. The Phoenix Lights were more than an event. They became a dividing line. For some, the night was confirmation, a reminder that we are not alone, that the universe is larger than we imagine, that mystery is alive above us. For others, it was confusion, an uncomfortable fracture in a world where answers are supposed to be neat and certain. And so belief was tested. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself drift into the silence of that desert night, when belief itself shifted. For many who witnessed the lights, faith was not the same afterward. Some, already believers in the possibility of life beyond Earth, felt vindicated. Their eyes had seen what their hearts already knew. They spoke more boldly now, less afraid of ridicule, more certain in their voices. "I know what I saw" became a mantra, repeated not with anger, but with calm conviction. Others, skeptics by nature, found themselves unsettled. They had dismissed stories before, waved off whispers, laughed at conspiracy. But that night their eyes betrayed them. Their rational minds faltered. They were forced to admit that something beyond explanation had crossed the Arizona sky. And still others clung tighter to doubt. For them, belief in the ordinary was safer. To admit that thousands of people witnessed something extraordinary was to admit that the world is stranger than they wished it to be. And so they leaned on words like flares, planes, imagination. But beneath all of it, belief, doubt, ridicule, the truth of memory remained. The Phoenix Lights were seen. The Phoenix Lights were real. What they were is still a question, but that they happened is not. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself one of the thousands who stood beneath that silent formation. You know what you saw. You feel the weight of it still. And yet, you hear laughter on the news, see headlines calling it explained. How do you hold both truths? That tension is the legacy of the Phoenix Lights. It was not only a sighting. It was a test of trust. Trust in your own eyes. Trust in your own memory. Trust against the voices of dismissal. And many chose memory. They chose to stand by their experience, no matter the ridicule. They chose to speak it aloud, even decades later. They chose to carry wonder instead of surrendering it to silence. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. The Phoenix Lights changed belief not only in the sky, but in ourselves. They reminded us that truth is not always handed down from officials or headlines. Sometimes truth is carried by ordinary people, standing together beneath extraordinary skies. And in that way, the Phoenix Lights belong not to governments, but to communities. Not to skeptics, but to witnesses. Not to dismissal, but to memory. One night in 1997 reshaped the way countless people looked upward. They no longer saw only stars. They saw possibility. And possibility is powerful. Possibility turns silence into wonder. Possibility turns ridicule into resilience. Possibility turns doubt into hope. As you rest tonight, let that possibility settle into you. Close your eyes. Inhale deeply. Exhale slowly. Let the desert night wrap around you like a blanket. Let the lights drift across your imagination once more. Silent, steady, undeniable. The Phoenix Lights may remain unexplained, but perhaps explanation was never the point. Perhaps the point was memory. Perhaps the point was wonder. Perhaps the point was to remind us that belief is not always about proof. Sometimes it is about presence. And the presence of that night has never left. It lingers still, in every glance upward, in every whisper of the desert, in every question that begins with, "What if?" And sometimes, what if is enough. Mysteries live where answers refuse to go. The Phoenix Lights have become one of those mysteries. A story carried not by officials, not by scientists, not by the headlines, but by the people who lived it. A story that survives not because it was explained, but because it wasn't. And maybe that is why it has stayed alive for so long. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let the rhythm of your breath mirror the rhythm of the lights, drifting silently across the desert sky. In the years since 1997, investigators have tried to solve it. They have traced military records, analyzed videos, interviewed pilots, gathered testimonies. Some lean toward explanations, aircraft in formation, flares over a distant range. But every explanation broke against the rock of memory, because memory does not bend so easily. Thousands of witnesses, all across the state, describing the same shape, the same silence, the same presence blotting out stars. It was not imagination. It was not confusion. It was certainty. and certainty has power. The Phoenix Lights remind us that not all mysteries must be solved. Some must simply be held, held like a secret, held like a gift, held like a story that comforts even as it confounds. Imagine it now. You are back in that night. The desert around you is still. The sky above is vast. The lights glide silently overhead. You feel awe, yes. You feel wonder, yes. But most of all, you feel calm. Calm. Because you are not alone. Calm. Because thousands of others are seeing it with you. Calm. Because mystery itself has chosen to reveal something gentle, something quiet, something unforgettable. That is the gift of the Phoenix Lights. They were not fire in the sky. They were not violence or chaos. They were silent, slow, deliberate. They were presence without threat, wonder without fear. And perhaps that is why they fit so perfectly into bedtime. Because bedtime is when we let go of answers. Bedtime is when we surrender control. Bedtime is when we allow mystery to hold us, to guide us, to soothe us into dreams. Close your eyes deeper. Inhale, exhale. Let the thought drift through you. Not all mysteries are meant to frighten. Some are meant to comfort. Some are meant to remind us of how small we are, and yet how connected. The Phoenix Lights were not just lights in the sky. They were lights in memory, lights in wonder, lights that turned an ordinary night into a shared dream. And that dream has lasted for decades. Even now, documentaries replay the voices. Researchers revisit the testimonies. Families tell their children, "We saw it. We remember." And tonight, you remember with them. The Phoenix Lights may never be solved. They may never be explained, but they do not need to be. Their purpose is not to give answers. Their purpose is to give wonder. And wonder, whispered in the silence of night, is enough to carry you into sleep. So breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Let the silence of the desert wrap around you. Let the lights drift gently across your mind. The Phoenix Lights are still here, not above Arizona anymore, but within you, in your memory, in your imagination, in your wonder. And wonder is the perfect companion for sleep. The Phoenix Lights were more than a moment in the sky. They became a moment in the soul. For thousands across Arizona, the night of March 13th, 1997, did not end when the lights vanished beyond the horizon. It lingered in their memories. It whispered in their conversations. It glowed faintly in their dreams. The sky had opened, and for a few hours, the ordinary had been replaced with wonder. Breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale. Imagine the desert again. The dry air brushing against your skin. The stillness of night, the vast sky glittering above. And then, once more, the lights. Silent, steady, majestic. They passed, but they never truly left. Because the Phoenix Lights were not just about what was seen. They were about who was there. The grandmother who held her granddaughter close as they watched from a porch swing. The young couple driving home who pulled their car to the side of the road, stepping out in awe. The police officer who radioed in with a trembling voice, trying to sound calm, but unable to mask his wonder. The children who gasped and pointed upward, their innocence unfiltered, their words simple but unshakable. It's real. And all of them together shared something unforgettable. Connection. For in that moment, the people of Arizona were united, not by fear, not by violence, not by disaster, but by wonder. Strangers stood side by side, their differences dissolved beneath a sky too vast for division. In those moments, There was no separation between believer and skeptic, adult and child, rich and poor. There were only human beings, looking upward, reminded of how small they were, reminded of how much mystery surrounded them. The Phoenix Lights were not just a UFO sighting. They were a shared human experience. And that may be their greatest legacy. Close your eyes deeper. Inhale. Exhale. Feel yourself among them, standing shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, with strangers, with families, all gazing into the same silent presence. You feel awe. You feel peace. You feel connected. That is what remains after the ridicule, after the explanations, after the silence of officials. Connection. Because the Phoenix Lights reminded us that mystery does not isolate, it unites. The desert became a cathedral that night. The sky became a hymn. And every witness became part of the same prayer. Prayer of wonder. Years have passed. The world has changed. But the Phoenix Lights remain steady in memory, like a constellation fixed above the horizon of time. Documentaries still revisit them. Conferences still honor them. Families still tell the story to children who were not yet born. And each retelling becomes another thread in the tapestry of connection. Not because the mystery is solved, not because the truth is known, but because the memory itself is enough. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. The Phoenix Lights remind us that life is not only about answers. It is about moments. Moments that draw us closer to one another. Moments that remind us we are part of something greater. Moments that stay with us long after they have passed. The Phoenix Lights were one such moment. And tonight, as you rest, you carry that moment within you. You are connected to those thousands of witnesses. You are connected to the desert, to the sky, to the silence that wrapped itself around Arizona that night. The lights may be gone, but the wonder remains. And wonder is eternal. The desert sky has always been a keeper of secrets. It holds them in silence, in shadow, in starlight. And on rare nights, it lets a secret slip through. A glimpse of something vast, something unknown, something unforgettable. The Phoenix Lights were one of those nights. Thousands saw them. Thousands remembered. And though officials explained and skeptics doubted, the memory did not die. It lingered in the air like a soft glow, unshaken, undeniable. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Feel yourself drifting beneath that Arizona sky once more. The silence wraps around you. The stars shimmer above. And then, lights. Steady, silent, majestic. They move across the sky, blotting out constellations, gliding without sound. You feel awe. You feel wonder. And you know without question that this night will live forever in you. The Phoenix Lights remind us that truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it moves slowly across a desert sky. Sometimes it rests not in headlines, but in hearts. Because the real story of the Phoenix Lights is not about craft or flares, not about debates or denial. It is about people, about connection, about wonder. A grandmother and granddaughter on a porch swing. A couple standing hand in hand on the roadside. A police officer speaking into his radio with trembling voice. A child whispering, "It's bigger than our house." All bound together by a single silent presence above. And in that moment, they were one. The Phoenix Lights were not frightening. They were calming. They were not chaos. They were order, precision, stillness. They were not a threat. They were an invitation to wonder, to imagine, to remember. And that is why they belong so perfectly to bedtime. Because bedtime is when we let go of answers. Bedtime is when silence becomes comfort. Bedtime is when we surrender to mystery. Tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, let the Phoenix Lights guide you. Let them remind you that not every question needs an answer. Not every truth needs proof. Sometimes, wonder is enough. Sometimes, memory is enough. The desert remembers. The people remember. And now you remember too. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Feel yourself sinking gently into the rhythm of the night, into the quiet certainty of mystery, into the calm embrace of wonder. The Phoenix Lights have never truly left. They live in memory. They live in silence. They live in every gaze lifted toward the stars. And tonight, they live in you. So close your eyes completely. Let go of the weight of needing to know. Let go of the noise of explanations. Let go of the fear of being alone. You are not alone. Above you, the stars glow. The desert sky keeps its secrets, and wonder moves quietly, like lights drifting across Arizona once more. Sleep deeply now. Sleep peacefully. Sleep with the memory of lights above you, guiding you into dreams. For the Phoenix Lights are not gone. They are waiting. Waiting in silence. Waiting in memory. Waiting in the stars. Good night.